Well, hello, everybody. We are back for another special Behind the Headlines, Israel-Hamas at War. We're bringing you some shorts here from the Jew and Gentile Podcast. Joining us is not only the Jewish sage himself, the one and only Mr. Steve Herzig, but also our good friend, Ty Perry, who is our field ministry manager. He ministers with Steve and I here at Friends of Israel, and he helps oversee all the outreach that's going on in the United States with the Friends of Israel. So, Steve, great to have you. Ty, great to have you.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yep, we're glad you're here with us, Ty. And I want to start off right away. You've had access to some college campuses, and they're in the news all the time, and how frightened many Jewish students are. And so you've got the heartbeat of a couple of different universities. I'd like you to start off by sharing first, who you contacted and what information you've gotten.
Sure. Well, one of my friends, Matt Kramer-Morning, is the director of Hillel, a big student organization at Purdue University. So I reached out to him recently for an interview on my podcast, and I just talked to him about what students are feeling and facing at the university campus there in Indiana. And I was actually pleased to learn that things have been pretty quiet there for them. They were one of the schools where the administration actually has stood up for Jewish students, called out anti-Semitism. He said that the administration's been in close contact with Hillel and other Jewish student leadership to see what they need, how they can help them and help the students there to feel safe in the wake of the war. Having said that, he said, there are protests, there are people on campus who are pro-Hamas, and that's alarming to students. But by and large, things at Purdue have been pretty quiet compared to what's happening at other universities throughout the country.
Yeah, and that's it's good to hear that you're connected to a university there that supports Israel and the Jewish people, is calling out the anti-Semitism, because we know that there are some huge Ivy League schools like Harvard, Columbia, NYU, that have kind of kept a low-key perspective on the trying to draw morality. This is equal to Israel's war against Hamas and Hamas against Israel. They don't want to draw the line in the sand of what is evil and what is good. They just want to kind of keep it even for all of the students, when in reality they're creating, I think, a mess for themselves by doing this. I do know that Brandeis University recently called out and even closed one of the chapters for the Palestinian
I was
student
shocked,
groups.
Chris. I was shocked in a good way. I was shocked and thankful because it seems to me it's like a soccer match or basketball or football. Well, 1,000 people die here, and then they measure how many die on the other side without estimating why the first blow was given in the first place.
Right.
And that's a problem, because when you see CNN and NBC and that's what they tell you, the numbers. But we want to go behind the numbers and talk about how this happened. What do we know about Gaza, Chris? I mean, they're in Gaza.
Yeah.
And everybody talks about Gaza. What is it? How big is it? Is there biblical history behind it? What do we know about Gaza?
Can I say something? The word I was looking for was moral equivalency. They're trying to draw a moral equivalency between Hamas and Israel, these college campuses. I also want to add this, too, before we get to Gaza, is that Ty Perry is the host of the Gesher podcast, which is actually connected to FOI Equip. And so if you're interested in hearing in more depth these interviews that Ty is doing, you can go to foiequip.org, and under the Jew and Gentile podcast is the Gesher podcast.
And he's been going longer than we have.
Oh, he's the pro.
How long have you been going, Ty?
Since 2020.
Yeah,
during
he's
COVID.
the man. He's the man.
He's the original, the OG when it comes to Friends of Israel podcasts here.
That's the first time I've been called an OG.
You
So
are
thanks for
an
that
OG,
clarification.
my friend. You're an OG. But see, here's the deal, is that Ty brings podcasts to a scholarly level Steve and I bring it down to like the what would you say, Steve? I don't even know.
Don't pin me down. We're good-hearted. How's that?
That's right.
We're good-hearted. We want to get info in. We're not telling you it's intelligent info unless Ty Perry is on.
That's right. Our intentions are pure. So we want to talk about Gaza because here's Ty and Steve. I don't know if you've been getting this, but I've gotten several phone calls from pastors, from individuals saying, "Here's the deal. I need to know what's going on with Gaza. What's the history of Gaza? How did we end up in this place? Just give me a timeline. I just need a timeline." And some of it comes from, I've got a family member who's supporting the Palestinians, and they go, "I need a timeline to be able to say, maybe you should think differently about this." So we put together a timeline for you that actually, Steve, it goes back to biblical times.
Oh, man. Samson was in Gaza.
That's right.
Samson. He couldn't see too well but when he was there, but he was in Gaza. There's all kinds of Joshua, the inheritance of Judah, Gaza with its towns and villages, we're told in the book of Joshua. And Amos, chapter 1, it says, "Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment." And so we know about the cities of Gaza. In fact, there were 5 Philistine cities. What were the names of those cities?
Yeah, fortunately, you wrote them down for me, which is great. Thank you very much. It's Gaza, of course, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gath. And what's interesting is that today in Israel, Ashdod, Ashkelon, I believe Ekron, and I think Gath as well, are all in Israel.
I have not been to Gath, but I have been to Ashkelon and Ashdod.
That's right. And if you're watching the news, oftentimes you'll see that the reporters reporting on southern Israel are staying in Ashdod or they're staying in Ashkelon because it is very close to Gaza. But these are actually big Israeli towns, cities.
And they're right on the water.
They're right, beautiful. I go there to the beach sometimes with our Origins group to Ashdod Beach and Ashkelon Beach. But the thing that's interesting about Gaza in history is that there was a major highway system that ran up and down the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. It was called the International Trunk Road. That's what scholars have called it. Some call it the Via Maris. And that ran from Egypt all the way up to basically the Silk Road, which went all the way up into beyond Mesopotamia, beyond even up into Turkey and things of that nature. It was a highway. And so if you wanted to get from Egypt all the way to Persia or to Greece, you had to go through this major highway system. And that highway system went through Gaza. Gaza is a very important strategic part of the southern part of Israel because it's the flattest area, especially in ancient times. It's a very flat area where people could easily traverse from Egypt. It isn't until you get up to the Carmel mountain range they have to begin to move inward in Israel. They could walk that coast the whole way up. But Gaza has had a very strategic, important part of history in Israel for a very long time.
But it hasn't always had this many people. There's 2 million people in Gaza. Do we have any idea how 2 million people got into? Well, first of all, what's the size? Ty, do you have any idea what the size of Gaza is?
I know it's about 25 miles long, so a pretty small piece of real estate. I don't know exactly how wide it is, but it's called a strip for a reason.
It
quite
is
small.
called a strip. It's no more than 5 or 6 miles. It's not perfectly straight, but it's about 5 miles or so. And so we're talking about what probably in modern times has been a area of land that I don't want it, you could have it, kind of land.
Yeah, the Philistines did control Gaza and that area for a very long time. They did, that was always a part of the battle between Israel and the Philistines was that part of the land because God did give it to Joshua. But you're right. For a long time, people, it was important for the highway system, but it's not like there were 2 million people living in it. It became a very, it started to swell later in history.
Well, in semi-modern history, the Turks had it. It wasn't that populated when the Turks had it. Great Britain had it, occupied that area. And then Egypt had it.
Yeah.
And nobody did anything with it.
And that all happened very quickly. So if you're thinking about the time period, we can go back to 1517. Between 1517 and 1917, the Ottoman Empire had control of pretty much all of Israel and the Gaza. All that you see in Israel and even Jordan itself, all of those countries were a part of the bigger Ottoman Empire.
It didn't make the news, though. It was not in the news.
No, there was no split. There was nobody dividing these things up.
That's right.
And then what happens is in 1917, the Allies defeat the Ottoman Empire. They defeat that whole system, and they end up starting to partition off parts of the land. And that's when the British assumed control of what's called a Mandate Palestine, British Palestine. The British take control of the Holy Land, which includes Gaza at that time. So between 1917 and 1948, the British have control of Gaza. But then in 1948, something interesting happened, Steve.
The War of Independence. And in the War of Independence, Egypt went north. There were 5 countries that attacked Israel, but Egypt went north. And they thought they were going to be able to go up the coast and around, but they got stopped, which to me, Chris and Ty, think about it. There are 650,000 total Jewish people, not their army, 650,000 citizens of Israel. 5 nations attacked them.
Mm-hmm.
And the best that could happen, which I only know stories from Zvi. We've had his granddaughter on with us, Yael. But the best they could do was go up north the coast, and they got stopped. And they were able to hold that part, Gaza, after the war. So they were stuck there, Egypt, that little strip.
That little tiny strip, that's right. But then what happens is after 1948, Egypt takes control of Gaza.
Yes.
So really quick, the history again. Ottoman Turks control it between 1517 and 1917. Between 1917 and 1948, the British control it. And then between 1948 and 1967, the Egyptians control it. So let's just rewind, and Ty, please speak into this if you have anything to say. But I don't hear anything about any Palestinians in there. This is huge. No. There's no Palestinian government. There's no Palestinians living in Gaza that are controlling Gaza. It's Ottomans. It's the British. It's Egypt.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Interesting, though. Let me just go back a little. In 1929, Israelis, or Palestinian Jews, they were called Palestinians at the time, they want to develop the area. Do you think beach? That's a Jewish thing. They want beach They want to put a kibbutz there. And
they're beautiful beaches. That's the thing. They're beautiful. Amazing, honestly.
But the pushback by Arabs at that time, any time there seems to be success, the Jewish people want to do something with it. Boom, there's trouble, and the British kicked them out.
Yep.
In 1929. And we're going to see that kicking out or removing Jews from the area has become a good part of Gaza history.
Big time. That will come later on. We'll talk about 2005 in a moment. Ty, I don't want you to feel left out. I know you're in your car in Michigan right now as you're talking to us. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Well, as we look at the history, you have to just, it becomes abundantly obvious that the current war in Israel has really nothing to do with Gaza. I mean, this is where the militants are right now. That's where Hamas is. But as Steve said, you had 5 nations, Arab nations, that came against Israel when they didn't even have anything to do with Gaza. And so this is about the Hamas and the Arab nations not wanting any Jewish state in the Middle East. And Gaza just happens to be the latest front in that war.
Wouldn't you
but
know
I think
that,
that's important for us to keep in mind.
Wouldn't you know that the words of wisdom would come crashing through Ty? He does a great job of
100%.
100% right. So what happens in 1967, Chris?
Yeah, this is the 6-day war when Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, I believe even Saudi Arabia and Iraq were involved in trying to push Israel into the sea. And so, again, they were outnumbered. I think they were outnumbered 10-1 during the Six-Day War. And so it was, again, another fight for their survival, for their existence.
Be fair, it was a preemptive strike.
That's true.
And
Israel,
that was it's very important to the history. We need to say it.
That's true, because that'll play out again in 1973 when they did know something was going on, but they didn't do anything.
The opposite.
The opposite,
That's right.
which created even, I think, a greater catastrophe for them in the 73 Yom Kippur War. But anyway, if you go back to 1967, Steve's right. Israel did do a sneak attack on the Egyptians in the south because they had all of their tanks lined up and all of their infantry. Basically, it looked like they were ready to storm Israel. So
No question.
So they moved in. So instead of Israel going into the sea, which is what they were expecting, Israel actually pushed the Egyptians all the way back and took the entire Sinai Peninsula, which included the Gaza Strip. They pushed back the Jordanians and took the West Bank, which is Judea, Samaria. And then they also pushed back the Syrians and took the Golan Heights up in the north.
And what did they do with it? Chris, what did they do with it? I think this is important.
Yeah.
Nothing was done when Egypt had it. Virtually nothing. What did Israel do with it?
They begin to develop cities, and they begin to develop towns, and they begin to develop an agricultural economy and a horticultural economy down. You're talking about in Gaza?
Yeah,
down in Gaza.
Even in Sinai.
Oh, in Sinai. Oh,
Later, when the negotiations happened and they gave back the Sinai, they gave back 2 or 3 oil wells.
Okay, that's right.
They gave back oil wells.
That's right. For peace.
For peace.
That's right.
And in addition to businesses, I'm not going to start a business in Sinai, nor would I start one in Gaza, to be honest.
No, but there
that's
are people,
what they did.
There are people who tell me back in the day when they went on Israel trips, there was a point where you could you land in Tel Aviv, do the whole biblical tour, and then without even having to change passport, go through checkpoints, you just go right to the Sinai, or to the Sinai, not I say peninsula, but to the mountain, mountain of Sinai, where God gave Moses the law, and you weren't even changing countries. You just were able to go right down in there, which was amazing.
They developed it, but they gave back the Sinai to Egypt in the name of peace. But they actually offered Gaza to Egypt. I don't know if you know that. Egypt said you could have it. You could keep it. You could keep it.
That's what Jordan did about the West Bank as well. They were, are we going to exchange this for peace? And even the king at that time in Jordan said, I don't want it back. I just want you to create a state for the Palestinian people. That was his desire, but he didn't want that land back either. So
we've got Gaza, and we've got the Jewish people in Gaza, and they're developing it. There's businesses. There's about 8,000 Jewish people who go into Gaza when there wasn't a lot of infrastructure. And they said, we're pioneers. We have that spirit. We're going to do it. And they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they build it. Like I said, they build an entire economy down there. They build homes. They build lives. Some of the Israelis lived in Gaza for 40 years. The moment that it opened up in 1967, like you said earlier, there had already been Jewish communities there for a long, long time. It's not like they just appeared in 1967. It goes back a long ways where Jewish people were a part of what was going on in Gaza. Then between 1967 and 2005, this is important. So let's rewind again. 1517 to 1917, Ottoman Turks controlled Gaza. Between 1917 and 1948, the British controlled Gaza. Between 1948 and 1967, the Egyptians controlled Gaza. Between 1967 and 2005, the Israelis have authority over Gaza Strip.
And Ty, what happens in 2005 at Israel's insistence?
Well, they disengage from Gaza, which doesn't just mean they're not going to pull military out or something. But they're taking out troops and what are called settlers or Israelis who live in that land. And so they leave all that infrastructure that you just talked about, all those businesses, the greenhouses, the factories, they leave it all there, hand it over to the Palestinians because they keep saying land will result in peace. And we find out that's not true at all, but it's all handed over to the Palestinians in Gaza.
Chris, I can't take this. They're giving them a business. People are looking for careers. They hand them, literally, I remember watching a news feed on TV at that time in 2005 where they leave And Ariel Sharon calls his soldiers to remove fellow Jews out of there, and they hand them the keys to business. Who wouldn't like that? It's like handing a McDonald's to, hey, you want a McDonald's? Here's the key.
Yeah, here's the franchise. Take it. Make the best of it.
That's right. Sei gesund. Just make your own life here in Gaza.
Oh, and this is really important. So again, not to confuse people with the history, but the Oslo Peace Accords that were developed in the early 90s was designed to give the Palestinians the ability to show the world that they were capable of having a state. And they worked to that end. But the problem is every time they go to show that we have the ability to create a state, then an intifada pops up. And there's so, of course, Israel, because of security, has always been reluctant to give the Palestinians the keys to all of the West Bank because of the security threats that are there. That was built in to the Oslo Peace Accords for the Israelis. But this is interesting because in 2005, Ariel Sharon, the prime minister, he actually disengages unilaterally. That means there's no communication with the UN. There's no communication with the United States. It's just the Israelis say, we're going to pull 8,000 Israelis that have been living there, some of them for 40 years, out of their homes.
And some of them crying and kicking their feet and getting dragged out of their homes by Israeli soldiers.
100%. And they said, we're going to give this to the Palestinians to show the world that they are capable of developing. It's like giving a kid, like you said, here, this is your opportunity to show us you're a man now. Build something from this. And what ends up happening is the complete opposite. It's the complete opposite.
Well, they're two of their big things that they had at the time. They had an airport. They also had a fishing industry. The airport ended up being used for smuggling armaments in. The fishing industry, which was a main thing, there would certainly be some people who fished, but there are other ways to smuggle arms in. And so what could Israel do? We want them to run their business, and they're accumulating arms. And that's so frustrating because the whole idea is free the Palestinians. Well, what do they do in 2007?
Yeah, that's the big thing, is that they end up having an election. Ty, maybe you want to speak into this election a little bit that was held in 2006, 2007 with the Palestinians. This becomes quite interesting and really defines the direction of where we are today with Gaza.
They voted their destiny, right,
Yes.
Ty?
Yes, they did. You think about they have all this infrastructure now they've been given by Israel. They destroy that physically. They destroy that, and then they have the option to essentially have a state by electing their own people into power. And they do what any sane person would do. They elect terrorists to govern them. So
Tyner's had a joke.
The guy's a comedian too.
I don't have a lot of sympathy for this whole. I feel bad certainly for Palestinians who are suffering, but at the same time, when you elect people into office who are their whole purpose is to destroy your neighbors, not to benefit you, it's not going to be a good future for you.
No, 100%. And the other thing too that I don't think most people realize is that if you keep up with politics right now in the world that we live in, the West Bank is different than Gaza. They are two separate worlds. But in 2006, when they were doing these elections, in 2006, they were unified. Gaza and the West Bank were to be governed by the exact same people, the exact same party, the exact same government. So when they had these elections, they were very surprised. The world was surprised. I remember George W. Bush was surprised because what happens is they thought that the more moderate president of the Palestinians would get elected again, and he didn't. He lost. He lost the election. Hamas won in the West Bank and in Gaza, which created a Palestinian civil war. And ultimately, that president, who's still president today, President Mahmoud Abbas, he sat there and said, by presidential decree, I'm still in charge. So he takes charge of the West Bank. And in Gaza, they start the Hamas start killing his members of the party in Gaza.
There was civil war.
There was civil war going on.
They're fighting amongst themselves. And so we have this group called Hamas, and Hamas is rated by most of the West as a terrorist group, as Ty just told us. And what is there in their charter? Their charter says what? Do you know, Chris?
Oh, it quotes the Hadith, I believe. I don't know if it's the Quran or the Hadith, but I believe it's the Hadith that talks about the fact that we're going to kill any Jews. Even the trees and the rocks will cry out, hey, there's a Jew over here. You should come kill him. That's in, I don't know what part of the charter it's in, but ultimately their main theme, their main mission is not to govern the Palestinian people. It's to eliminate Israel. That is their goal. And Jewish, that's the other part too. Not just the, hey, we're resisting this country. It's to kill Jewish people. It doesn't matter where you are. You could be in the land or out of the land. You're an infidel. So
that's right. And Ty, Chris asked me on our regular podcast, The Jew and the Gentile, he asked me how I felt as a Jewish person. I live in America. I'm still Jewish. Just because I'm a believer doesn't remove what I am. And I know you have a relation, at least a couple relationships, I think, with some rabbis, but one of which you kind of wanted to get a feel for the Jewish community. Do you have any insight into that?
Yes, my friend Rabbi Felipe Goodman is the lead rabbi at Temple Beth Shalom in Las Vegas, I think it's the largest synagogue there. And I asked him, what are your congregants feeling right now? And he said, what we did is we had some solidarity events, and he had printed up 1,000 yard signs to say, I stand with Israel, for his congregants. And he said, Ty, the funny thing is, who took them all? Christians. He said, because my people are fearful that it will cause them to be attacked. So I thought that was interesting. First of all, I'm glad that Christians are taking them and saying, we're not afraid to stand with the Jewish people. But it illustrates pretty clearly how what's happening in Israel is not about just Israel. This is about, as you said, anti-Semitism. This is a hatred of Jewish people, whether they live in the Middle East or they live in Las Vegas, Nevada, or wherever they may be. That's the fundamental underlying current here, is a hatred of the Jewish people. And that was made very evident in Rabbi Goodman's exercise of trying to give these signs out to his congregants.
And I really appreciate that, because it doesn't matter if you're Jewish and you're LGBT, or you're Jewish and you're for abortion, and you're for Black Lives Matter, and you're the people who are pro-Palestinian, they don't care.
There is no intersectionality when it comes to this situation.
All
Not in Gaza, at least.
They know is you're Jewish. And
well, and then to that point, one friend of mine, he said, he's more liberal, and he said, I've been doing all this interfaith work for years with Muslims and more liberal Christian denominations, and he said, and now that my people are in trouble, no one's helping me.
That is the bottom line.
That's a great point.
That's really significant.
Hey, can I read something to you guys? I wrote this in my book on Israel Always, because I think it's interesting. It's what Hillary Clinton had to say about the disengagement when Israel left. I wrote this: on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, the comedian and political commentator questioned then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton on the abysmal status of the Gaza Strip. And her response struck at the heart of the Middle East conflict. She said this: when Israel withdrew from Gaza, they left a lot of their businesses. There was a really very valuable horticulture business that was set up by the Israelis who had lived in Gaza. And the idea was that that this would literally be turned over money that was provided, that they would give money to the Palestinians. There would be a fund that would train Palestinians in Gaza to do this work. And basically, the leadership said, we don't want anything left from Israel, and destroyed it. That mentality, she said, is hard for me to deal with. And I really think that cuts at the heart of the Hamas-Israeli conflict. And this, remember, bear in mind, this is coming from a Democratic individual. I've always said to people back, even when Trump and Clinton were racing, what do you think about Israel with the Democrats? What do you think about Israel with the Republicans? I said, quite honestly, I think the Clintons have been burned by the Palestinians so many times, literally burned by them, that they don't have any more compassion for their politics or anything. But I really think it cuts at the heart when she said this. We don't want, when she says that the Hamas is saying and Palestinians saying, we don't want anything from Israel. Even when Israel gives you the keys to the land, and then on top of that gives you the bonus packages of the money and the resources and the tools and the businesses and all of these things, they still burned it all to the ground to turn it into a rocket launch location to launch rockets into Israel. That's what Gaza is right now. It is a rocket launch facility to target Israel and the Jewish people.
Ty, you get the last word.
Well, just to that point, Hillary Clinton, even just in the last couple of weeks, she was asked about a ceasefire. And I'm not quoting her, but she said to the effect that means the destruction of the Jewish people. I don't find much in common with Hillary, but I think a broken clock is right twice a day. And when it comes to Israel, so far, she's pretty good. So I appreciate even someone I would disagree with on most things, having some pretty clear-eyed vision on the situation in Gaza.
Well, and that's creating a big situation. Again, we're not a political organization, but it is creating a situation in the Democratic Party. It's splitting the party in half on what to do with Israel. But the good thing, but on the other side of the aisle, the Republicans seem pretty unified in their approach to Israel. And so this is kind of a little brief history. Oh, there's so much more to Gaza.
So much more. Chris, tell them how they can access the intellectual tie.
Yeah,
the better podcast.
Yeah, if you need a break from the Meshuggah here on the Jew and Gentile podcast, you can go to foiequip.org and you can listen to Ty's podcast, the Gesher podcast. Ty, tell us again who you just interviewed and what people will hear when they get to the Gesher podcast.
So right now, if you go on there, you can listen to several different interviews for the past few years about the Israel-American relationship between the evangelical and Jewish communities. But then recently, I have been interviewing and will continue to interview Jewish voices here in the U.S. I'm also interviewing some Israelis who are living there right now about what they're facing and how they're responding to the crisis there. So some good conversations with different Jewish leaders in the Jewish community about just the various facets of this conflict and how it's impacting them and the people they serve.
That's great. Hey, be sure to go to foiequip.org. There you can listen to the Gesher podcast. You can subscribe for the Gesher podcast there. And hey, while you're there, if you're just tuning in for the first time to the Jew and Gentile podcast, you can like and subscribe that. And Steve is holding up the mug on a mug. You can be sure to go to, I can't even get it out. Go to gofoi.org/mug. And there, if you give a donation of a minimum of $10, we hope you give more. You're helping expand the ministry of the Friends of Israel to serve and minister to Jewish people, especially during this very difficult time. So again, that's gofoi.org/mug on a mug. Hey, everybody, we'll have more of these shorts coming out, and we'll be talking more about the war. Ty, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.